This 2-minute drill is titled Deciphering the Dividend Expressions on F.A.S.T Graphs Part 1. And the idea behind the way we show dividends on F.A.S.T graphs is to give the user an instantaneous expression of what the dividends will look like on a company just by drawing the symbol and prodding the company. For example, in our first example here, we have Atmos Energy. And what you can see here is that the light blue shaded area represents dividends. However, dividends are paid out of the green shaded area, which represents earnings. So in the case of Atmos Energy, what you can clearly see here is that this company has a very high payout ratio, or they pay out a very large portion of their earnings to shareholders in dividends. And if we go down to the performance chart, you can see that the payout ratio averages something around 60% for most years, but during the years where the earnings were weak, it was over 170%. So by simply looking at this graph, you can see that there's a high payout ratio. Additionally, if you look at AGL Resources, you'll see a second example where you have a company with a very large payout ratio. Again, the green shaded area is earnings, and the reason we stack the light blue shaded area dividends, which are paid out of the earnings on top, is so that you can get this immediate visual perspective of the payout ratio. But there's another reason which will become clearer in part 2 of this video series. But again, you're looking at a company here with a very high payout ratio. As we go through our next examples, you'll start seeing examples of companies with a lower payout ratio. So obviously, when you immediately run a chart on Fuller, you can see that the amount of dividends they pay as a percentage of their earnings is very low relative to the first two examples. And then when you check that, you can see that their payout ratio averages somewhere between in the 20s to the teens, and occasionally it dips a little higher when earnings have fallen, as they did during this period here. In our next example, we'll look at Valspar, and you'll see again a low payout ratio relative to its full earnings. A company like Procter & Gamble, which pays about 40 to 50% of their earnings out, it becomes very clear. You can see that the company does pay a steady dividend. When you look at a name like Wells Fargo, and this is an important aspect of this, you can see that Wells Fargo had a big drop in earnings here, and what you can actually see by looking at that visual is that they cut their dividend in 2009 and 10 during the recession, and of course by having it visually depicted like that, you can instantly see that. When you look at PepsiCo, you get another example of a company very similar to Procter & Gamble. And then this is interesting because here you can see a company, Kohl's, that never paid a dividend. They paid their first dividend this year, and it becomes very clear. And that's in contrast to companies like Fiserv that don't pay a dividend. When a company doesn't pay a dividend, you can see it very clearly. So the dividends are the portion of earnings that are paid out, and they're expressed as a light blue shaded area.